Not yet. That's the whole philosophy. 3 syllables. A German Marxist mystic spent 92 years and 3,000 pages saying not yet, and somehow that was enough to get him blacklisted by the Nazis, adopted by the communists, purged by the same communists, and then handed back to the students who were busy setting things on fire in 1968. Not yet. You could tattoo it on your wrist. You could say it to your alarm clock. You could say it to the mirror at 43 when the life you were supposed to be living still hasn't shown up and you're starting to think that maybe it got the address wrong. Ernst Bloch was born in 1885 in Ludwigshafen. You don't know Ludwigshafen. Nobody romanticizes Ludwigshafen. It's a factory town on the Rhine, the kind of place that exists so that better places can have chemicals. His father was a railway administrator. The family was Jewish, assimilated, respectable, and, according to Bloch, deeply, structurally, almost professionally boring. He described his childhood home as musty. Not cruel, not dramatic, just musty. The low-grade suffocation of a life arranged around not wanting too much. So, of course, Bloch wanted everything. He wanted it with the specific hunger of a kid who decided that daydreams are not a symptom but a diagnosis. That the gap between what is and what should be isn't a personal failure. It's a philosophical category. He called it the not yet conscious, the thing you want before you have words for wanting it, the dream you're having right now, the one you'd be embarrassed to admit in daylight. Bloch said that dream is not escapism. He said it's data. He said the future is already in there, incomplete, restless, knocking around in your chest at night when the rest of your brain has the good sense to sleep. He built an entire philosophy out of that knock. Not yet. He wrote The Spirit of Utopia at 33. He wrote The Principle of Hope, all 3 volumes, all 1,400 pages, in exile, in the reading room of the Harvard's Widener Library, in a country whose language he never fully learned, about a future he wasn't sure he'd live to see. This is the joke. The philosopher of hope, stateless, broke, functionally invisible, sitting in a library that smells like old money and older wood, writing the encyclopedia of human longing. Nobody asked him to. He just couldn't stop. That's either insane or it's the sanest thing anyone has ever done. The line between those two things is thinner than Bloch would have liked. This is the story of a man who believed the future was more real than the present, who bet everything on what doesn't exist yet, who was rewarded for that bet with exile, erasure, and a very long argument with history that history kept winning, and who never, not once, changed his answer. Not yet. Let's go. 835 Ludwigshafen in 1885 is not a place that produces mystics. It produces chemicals. BASF opened its factory there in 1865, 20 years before Bloch arrived, and the town organized itself around that fact like flies around shit. The Rhine runs through it great and purposeful. The sky smells like industry. The people are workers, administrators, people who know which train leaves at what time because their livelihood depends on it. Ernst Bloch's father knew every train. He ran the schedules and he was good at it. He expected his son to be good at something similarly useful. His son, on the other hand, was busy having visions over in the corner. Across the Rhine, close enough to walk, was Mannheim. Theatres, libraries, a city with a ceiling high enough to stand under. Bloch crossed that river as often as he could. He read fairy tales with the intensity other boys brought to fistfights. He read Schiller and Kant and anything else the library would give him. He was the kid who discovered that ideas are a form of escape velocity. Apply enough of them, and you can leave the ground. He left for Munich in 1905 when he was just 20 years old. In Munich, he studied philosophy and German literature. Then he went to the Würzburg and added music theory and physics to the list, because why not? Because the whole world is connected if you look at it right. Because a man who studies only one thing is a man who has already decided what he's going to find. Then Berlin. Then Georg Simmel's private seminar, 1908 to 1911, where Simmel was doing something that was then considered unusual and is now considered obvious, treating everyday life as a philosophical problem. Fashion, money, the stranger on the street. Simmel believed culture was where philosophy actually lived, in the texture of how people move through the world. Bloch agreed loudly. He always agreed loudly. But it was Heidelberg in 1912 that changed everything. Specifically, it was Georgi Lukács. The two of them met in Max Weber's circle and recognized each other immediately, the way that people with the same slightly dangerous intensity always do. Lukács was Hungarian, brilliant, a few years older, already working through questions about what it meant for art to be alienated from life under capitalism. Bloch was working through questions about everything else. They argued constantly. They were inseparable. Later, Lukács would describe those Heidelberg years as among the most formative of his life. Bloch would go further. He would say that Lukács taught him that philosophy was not observation, it was intervention. This is not a small thing to learn at 27. What Bloch was building in those arguments over coffee and across seminar tables in Heidelberg was a philosophy that refused to accept the present tense as the final word. Everyone around him was trying to understand what is. Weber was mapping the iron cage of modernity. Simmel was cataloguing the forms of modern life. Even Marx, whom Bloch loved with the specific devotion of a man who has found his religion, had spent most of his energy on analysis. What is capitalism? How does it work? Where did it come from? Bloch looked at all of that and said, well, fine, but what about what isn't yet? He was asking about the future, not as prediction or theory, but as ontology. He believed the not yet was a category of being. That incompleteness was not a problem to solve, but a structure of reality. The universe itself was unfinished. You were unfinished. That dream you had last night was not a malfunction. It was a message from the part of existence that hasn't happened yet, bleeding back through the membrane. In 1918, he published A Spirit of Utopia. He was 33. The First World War had just finished eating a generation. Europe was standing in the wreckage looking at its own hands. Into this specific moment, Bloch dropped a book that was part political philosophy, part mystical theology, part musical theory, and entirely impossible to categorize. The critics didn't know what to do with it. The academics filed it under eccentric. A handful of people read it and felt like they'd been told a secret about themselves they hadn't known anyone else knew. That handful included Walter Benjamin. It included Theodor Adorno. It included Bertolt Brecht. The men who would spend the next several decades reshaping how Western culture thought about culture were, in 1918, reading Ernst Bloch and underlining things. He was not famous. He was not rich. He had no university position. He was a private scholar, which is a polite way of saying he was a man with enormous ideas and no institutional support, which is an impolite way of saying he was perpetually broke. His first wife, Elsa von Stritsky, whom he married in 1913, died in 1921. He remarried, and he continued writing. He published Thomas Munther's Theologian of Revolution in 1921, a book about a 16th century radical preacher who believed God was on the side of the peasants and was executed for saying so. Bloch admired this tremendously. You can see the shape of the man forming, the working-class kid from the musty house, the self-taught mystic who walked into the most important intellectual circles in Germany and argued with everyone until they respected him. The philosopher who kept writing books nobody asked for, about a future nobody could prove, in a voice that sounded like scripture and political pamphlet at the same time. He was not careful, and he was not modest. He was not interested in the kind of philosophy that decorates the present. He wanted to blow a hole in it. And history, which often has a vicious sense of timing, was about to give him a very different hole entirely. Exile for Bloch was Switzerland, then Austria, then France, then Czechoslovakia, and then a boat. It was learning which bureaucrats to bribe and which borders close at night. It was carrying your manuscripts in your arms, because if the manuscripts go, you go, because without the work, you're just a middle-aged German Jew with bad timing and increasingly limited options. It was arriving in New York in 1938 with your third wife, Carola, your ideas, and English so limited that America, the country that had just saved your life, was also completely incomprehensible to you. Functionally, linguistically, spiritually incomprehensible. The land of the free, and Bloch couldn't order breakfast. The Nazis had come to power in 1933. Bloch left Germany that year. He was 47, unpublished in any major institutional sense, and unknown outside a small circle of people who would themselves spend the next decade either fleeing or dying. He moved, then moved again, and then again. Switzerland to Austria to France to Czechoslovakia, each step another country that was about to become somewhere you didn't want to be. He had a gift for this. a talent for arriving somewhere just before it caught fire, which sounds lucky until you realise it means watching everywhere you've just been ablaze. He watched Germany catch fire, he watched Austria, he watched Czechoslovakia. But he kept writing. Now this is either heroic or deeply pathological, and the honest answer is that it's both simultaneously, which is the only interesting way to be anything. In Prague in 1938, weeks before the Germans arrived, Bloch was finishing essays. In Paris, while Europe was making increasingly alarming noises, Bloch was in the library. The man had the focus of someone who has decided that history is other people's problem, which could be delusional in anyone else, but in Bloch was actually a philosophical position. He believed the future was being built in the act of imagining it. Stop imagining, and you hand the future to whoever kept going. He was not going to hand the future to the Nazis. He was going to sit in a library and build a better one out of words. Then America, to Cambridge, Massachusetts, then Harvard's Widener Library, which has that particular kind of confidence that comes from never having had to flee anything. Bloch sat in that reading room, this exile from Ludwigshafen, by way of every country in Central Europe, and he wrote. He wrote what would become the Principle of Hope, 3 volumes, 1,400 pages, an encyclopedia of human longing organized around the argument that hope is not a feeling. Hope is a structure of reality. Hope is what the universe is made of when it's between states. He wrote it in German, in America, for an audience that didn't exist yet. His English never really arrived. He was, by multiple accounts, almost entirely isolated. His friends from the Heidelberg years, from the Berlin years, from the glittering, catastrophic world of Weimar Germany were scattered. Some were in California, some were dead. Brecht was in California, Benjamin was dead, Adorno was in California, writing letters that presumably arrived, though what comfort letter from Adorno provides is a question worth sitting with. Bloch lectured occasionally. He found small audiences. He remained, in the vast American philosophical landscape, approximately invisible. He was 63 years old and had never held a permanent university position. And then, in 1948, East Germany called. The offer was the chair of philosophy at the University of Leipzig, a full professorship, a platform, a country being built on the principles he had spent his life arguing for. Marxism, applied, actual, in progress, with all the inevitable complications that the phrase in progress contains, and that Bloch, who had just spent 15 years writing about the not yet, perhaps should have examined more carefully. Of course he went. And you might want to judge him for this. You might want to say, you're in America, you had your manuscript, you know what these regimes do. You had watched Europe from the inside, how could you? And the answer is that he was 63 and exhausted and had spent 3 decades arguing for something he had never seen attempted, and here was an attempt. An imperfect, compromised, already somewhat alarming attempt, but an attempt nonetheless. He was the philosopher of hope. He couldn't exactly refuse to show up when Hope put on a suit and offered him a salary. He became the philosopher of the GDR, almost officially. He won the National Prize in 1955. He had students. He had a platform. He edited a journal, Deutsche Zeitschrift für Philosophie. Now, that's really terrible pronunciation. I apologize to all German speakers listening. Which is an extremely serious name for a journal. It's the kind of name that makes clear everyone inside it is having a very rigorous time. And then the Hungarian uprising happened in 1956. Workers and students in Budapest rose against the Soviet-backed government in October. The Red Army crushed it in November. Thousands were killed. Bloch watched this and revised his view of the regime he was living under, which is a very calm way of saying the thing that broke. He started saying so. He started writing about humanistic freedom, about the difference between the utopia Marx imagined and the bureaucratic ice palace that had been built in its name. The party, of course, did not appreciate the distinction. In 1957, at 72 years old, they forced him to retire, not for his age, for his opinions, which had become, in the language of the party, deviations. His journal was suppressed, he was forbidden to publish, his works were condemned. The state that had hired him to be its philosopher decided that what it actually wanted was a philosopher who agreed with the state, which is not a philosopher, which is considerably cheaper and requires no salary. Bloch had built a philosophy of the not yet, and the party had built the philosophy of the already decided. It was never going to end any other way. The dreamer and the bureaucrat walk into a bar. The bureaucrat closes the bar. August 1961. Bloch is in West Germany on a visit. He's 75 years old. He has bad eyes and good arguments and a lifetime of experience watching governments do things governments shouldn't do. Then the news comes. The German Democratic Republic, the country that hired him and fired him and owns most of his books and all of his furniture, has begun constructing a wall through the middle of Berlin, overnight. Concrete and wire in the specific architectural language of a state that's decided the problem with its citizens is that they keep leaving. Bloch does not go back. This is a decision that sounds easy from the outside. Of course you don't go back. There's a wall. The wall's a fairly clear communication of intent. But consider what he's leaving. His library, his remaining manuscripts, his apartments, the student he actually cared about, the institutional life he had waited 63 years to have and held for 9 years before it was taken from him. Consider that he is 75. That starting over at 75 is not starting over so much as it is falling forward and having grounded closer than it looks. He falls forward and lands in Tübingen. The University of Tübingen gives him an honorary chair. A chair, not a salary. Honorary meaning we admire you enormously and would prefer it if you didn't cost us anything. He accepts. He sets up in a small house. He starts talking to students again. This is what Bloch does instead of breaking down. He finds the nearest person willing to argue and he starts arguing. But let's stay in the crisis, because the crisis isn't the wall. The crisis is what the wall represents, which is the total, comprehensive, almost impressively complete failure of the thing Bloch had given his life to. Not Marxism as an idea, the idea he still believed in, would always believe in, the way certain people believe in God despite overwhelming counter-evidence, because the alternative is a universe without a centre, and that's worse. What had failed was Marxism as a practice, as a political reality, as the actual existing historical project of building something better than what came before. Bloch had a theory. The theory was that human beings carry within them a utopian surplus, a drive towards something more, something not yet realized, embedded so deep in consciousness that it shows up in fairy tales and architecture and the way you feel on the first warm day in March when you can't quite explain why you're almost crying. Come on, we've all been there. He called it the Vor-Schein, the pre-appearance, the anticipatory glow of a future that's already casting light backward through time into the present. Beautiful theory. Then look at the wall. The wall is also a theory. The wall's theory is that the future is settled, finished, already accomplished, and the only problem is the people who haven't accepted this yet. The wall is the state telling its citizens that their daydreams are a security risk, that the not yet is counter-revolutionary, that hope, Bloch's hope, the specific, restless, uncontainable hope he had been writing about for 50 years, is in fact a form of treason. He built a philosophy of open future. They built a wall to close them. Now pile on what came before, because this is where we count the cost, and the cost here is staggering. His first wife Elsa died in 1921. 15 years of exile through half of Europe with a suitcase and a manuscript. A decade in America where he was functionally a ghost, writing in a language no one was reading, in a country that regarded German Marxist mysticism with the same enthusiasm it regarded a long-haul flight in the middle seat. Then Leipzig. Then the brief extraordinary feeling of being somewhere, of mattering institutionally, publicly, in the actual world where decisions get made. Students who stayed after class, a journal with his name on the masthead, a chair, a proper chair, with a salary attached. Then the party decides he's a deviant. Then the wall. Then Tübingen. Honorary 75, legally owning approximately nothing because everything he left behind in Leipzig now belongs to a state he has defected from, which is a legal term for ran away from, which is what you do when the alternative is going back behind the wall. Now this is the part that should break a person. This is the part that in a more sensible narrative would produce either capitulation or collapse. He would recant, he would go quiet. He would write his memoirs in a minor key and accept that history had not gone his way and die peacefully in a house full of plants and cats. Bloch does none of these things. He goes to the students. In 1968, West German universities are on fire. Not literally, mostly, although occasionally literally. Students are reading Marcuse, reading Marx, reading each other's manifestos at 3 a.m, furious about Vietnam, about capitalism, about the comfortable post-war settlement that had rebuilt Germany on the precise social structures that had produced a thing that destroyed Germany. They are looking for a philosopher. They find Bloch. A man in his 80s, half blind, still arguing and still insisting that the future is real and the present is provisional, and the not yet is not a consolation prize but the only honest account of what existence actually is. he becomes their saint. Now this is funny. Not funny like a joke. Funny like the universe has a structural commitment to irony that it refuses to abandon under any circumstances. The man the Communist Party found too radical for communism becomes the philosophical godfather of a student revolt that the capitalist West finds too radical for capitalism. He doesn't fit anywhere. He fits everywhere that's on fire. He had written years before that utopia is not a destination, it's a direction. That the point was not to arrive, but to move. That hope was not the belief that things will get better, it was the refusal to accept that this, here, now, what exists, is the final word. The wall said final word. Bloch said not yet. The wall was made of concrete. Bloch was made of something considerably harder to pour. Hope is not the thing that shows up when everything is fine. Hope doesn't show up when everything is fine, because when everything is fine, you don't need it. You have everything. You have fine. Fine is its own reward. Hope is the thing that shows up when the party has fired you, when the wall has gone up, your library's on the wrong side of an international border, when you're 75 years old in a city you didn't choose and you have approximately nothing except the argument you've been making since 1918 that the future is real and the present is not the end. That's when you find out if you actually believe it. Now, Bloch believed it, not as a performance, not as the philosophical equivalent of a motivational poster, which is hope's most degraded form, the form that ends up in sans serif font over a photograph of a mountain. Bloch believed it the way a structural engineer believes in load-bearing walls, technically, precisely, with full awareness of exactly what the belief was being asked to carry. Tübingen is a university town on the Neckar River in Baden-Württemberg. It is by most accounts extremely pleasant. Medieval architecture, there's a castle, a river you can row on. The kind of place that looks like someone's idea of where a philosopher should live, which makes it quietly funny that Bloch arrived there as a refugee from a workers' state, with no furniture and an honorary title that came with no money. Pleasant town, difficult circumstances. Bloch unpacked whatever he had and started talking, and the students came. This is the revelation. And like all real revelations, it arrives not as a thunderclap, but as a slow realization that what you thought was wreckage is actually foundation. Bloch had spent 50 years building a philosophy in the margins. No institution kept him for long. No system could contain him. The Nazis found him incompatible. The Americans found him invisible. The East Germans found him deviant. He was too mystical for the pure Marxists and too Marxist for the pure mystics, too Jewish for the nationalists, too German for the exiles, too utopian for everyone who had decided that reality was the only responsible subject for philosophy. And now here were the students of 1968 who had looked at the world their parents built and decided that reality, specifically, was the problem. They didn't want a philosopher who described things. They wanted a philosopher who insisted things could be otherwise. They wanted someone who had been saying for 50 years that the present is not the verdict, only the evidence, and who had kept saying it through exile and erasure and a wall and a forced retirement and all the other ways that history communicates that you should probably stop. They wanted Bloch. They got Bloch. He was absolutely delighted. The revelation was that the surplus escapes. Whatever system you build, however tight, however totalizing, however many walls you pour, the utopian surplus in human beings escapes. It has to. It is not a political position. It is not an ideology. It's not a choice. It's what Bloch spent his entire life arguing is structural to consciousness itself. The not yet is not something people decide to believe in. It's something people cannot stop believing in, the way they can't stop dreaming, the way the body insists on breathing even when the mind has given up on the whole project. The East German state tried to contain it. It suppressed the journal. It condemned the books. It built the wall. And the surplus went over the wall and found the students in Tübingen and Frankfurt and Berlin and came out as 1968, as protest, as the refusal of a generation to accept the post-war settlement as the final word on what human life could be. You cannot kill the not yet. You can inconvenience it enormously. You can make it flee through 4 countries in one suitcase, but it keeps writing. It sits in the reading room at Harvard and it writes. Bloch had a name for the thing he was describing, the glow that the future cast backward into the present, the anticipatory shimmer of something not yet realized making itself felt in dreams and art and fairy tales, and the particular feeling you get standing at the edge of something you can't name. This, the Vor-Schein, the pre-appearance, the light from a fire that hasn't been lit yet, somehow already warm. You've felt this, and don't pretend that you haven't. You felt it at the beginning of something before you knew what it was beginning. You felt it reading certain books or hearing certain music or standing in a doorway at a party looking at someone across a room and knowing, without evidence or logic, without any justification that would survive a clear-headed morning, that something is about to change. That is the Vor-Schein. That is the future announcing itself in the only language it has, which is feeling, which is longing, which is hope in its most raw and unprocessed form. Bloch said that feeling is not a distraction from reality, it is reality's leading edge. The East Germans condemned his books in 1957. By 1968, those same books, in West German editions, in photocopied pages passed hand to hand in seminar rooms and student apartments, were shaping the political imagination of a generation. Suppression, it turns out, is an excellent marketing strategy. The GDR made Bloch's work feel dangerous, and dangerous things get read. There is a justice in this, so clean it almost restores your faith in narrative. Almost. Bloch had argued since The Spirit of Utopia in 1918 that the task of philosophy was not to describe the world, but to orient humanity toward what the world could become. Every system he encountered, left or right, east or west, tried to close that orientation down. Tried to say, this is it. This is the destination. Stop moving. And every time, the not yet leaked out through the cracks. Through the students, through the books, through this old man in Tübingen who at 83 was still arguing. The revelation is not that hope wins. Hope doesn't win. History isn't that generous. The revelation is that hope doesn't need to win. It only needs to continue. And continuing is the one thing, the only thing, that every force arrayed against Bloch could not make him stop doing. Ernst Bloch dies on August 4th, 1977 in Tübingen. He is 92 years old. He's nearly blind. He spent the last 15 years of his life revising his complete works for a 17-volume edition published by Suhrkamp, which is the kind of project you take on when you're either extremely optimistic about your remaining time or constitutionally incapable of stopping. He finishes it. Of course he finishes it. This is the man who wrote 3 volumes of utopian philosophy in a foreign library in a country that didn't know he existed. Finishing things was not Bloch's problem. Bloch's whole problem, his entire lifelong problem, is that he can't find an ending he believes in. Which makes sense. He didn't believe in endings. He believed in continuations. 92 years of not yet. A man born in a factory town who walked into the most important intellectual circles of the 20th century and argued his way to a seat at every table, and he got thrown out of every table and then found another one. It looks like 5 countries, 3 wives, one philosophy that never changed its central claim even as the world threw everything it had at it. It's the Widener Library reading room. It's a forced retirement at 72 for the crime of believing in human freedom inside a state that had trademarked the phrase. It's a wall going up and a man deciding not to go back, and a new city and a new generation and the same argument still, again, from the beginning. Now from the outside it looks like stubbornness. From the inside, Bloch would tell you, looks like evidence. The not yet is not a consolation. When Bloch says the future is real, he's not saying things will work out. He's not saying history bends towards justice, which is a beautiful sentence that history has spent considerable energy disproving. He's saying something harder and stranger and more useful than that. He's saying that incompleteness is not a failure of the present. It's the structure of existence. That the universe is not a finished thing with humans in it. It is an unfinished thing, and humans are the part of it that knows it's unfinished. And that knowledge, that specific, uncomfortable, luminous knowledge, is not a burden. It is the only honest account of what we are. You are not a finished thing. You know this. You've been pretending otherwise because finished things are easier to manage, easier to schedule, easier to present at dinner parties when someone asks what you do and what you want and where you see yourself in 5 years. Never ask me that at a dinner party, by the way. If you stumble across me in some random dinner party and you ask me what I want in 5 years, I'm going to give you an interesting answer. I'm not going to tell you what it is. Just in case. Let's keep it interesting. Finished things. Finished things have answers to those questions. And you don't, and neither do I, and neither did Bloch. He turned that into a philosophical system and died at 92, still adding footnotes to it. Not yet. The students of 1968 grew up. They became professors and politicians, and in the specific disappointment arc that the universe reserves for revolutionaries, middle managers. The protests ended. The moment passed. The wall didn't come down until 1989, 12 years after Bloch died, which means he didn't see it, which is the kind of thing that will be unbearable if you believed in endings. I remember when the Berlin Wall came down. I remember when David Hasselhoff sang Looking for Freedom, was it, on the Berlin Wall? That was terrifying. Good old Hasselhoff. You know how to get around. Where was I? I've completely lost my place now. Bloch didn't believe in endings, didn't we? There we are. Bloch didn't believe in endings. He believed the wall coming down was always already implicit in the not yet. That it was always in there, in the surplus, in the dreams of the people on the wrong side of the concrete. Not as a prediction, but as a direction, a vector. The future pulling the present forward by the collar. He also believed, it should be said, in a number of things that didn't pan out, and intellectual honesty requires that we stand in that room for a moment without looking for the exit. He believed in Marxism as a redemptive project long after Marxism as a political practice had done things that made redemption a complicated word to use in the same sentence. He went to Leipzig knowing what Soviet-style communism was and went anyway. He was forced out and still called himself a Marxist. There's a version of this that is admirable and a version that is obtuse, and the true version contains both simultaneously, pressed together, inseparable, which is also what Bloch would say about most important things. He was not a saint. Saints don't get forced into retirement by the people who hired them to be saints. He was a philosopher who bet on a horse that kept losing and kept betting. Not because he was foolish, but because he believed the race was longer than anyone else was willing to admit. Here's what he leaves. Not the system exactly, though the system is there, 17 volumes of it, dense and poetic and occasionally maddening and worth every page. What he leaves is a permission, a philosophical permission to take your longing seriously, to not apologize for the gap between what is and what you feel should be, to treat that gap not as evidence of your naivety, but as evidence of your accuracy. The world is not finished. You know this. The fact that you know this, the specific ache of knowing this, is not a malfunction of your psychology. It is a correct reading of the situation. He leaves the Vor-Schein, the pre-appearance, the light from the fire that hasn't been lit yet. He says it's in the fairy tales you read as a child, in the music that does something to your chest you can't explain, in the architecture of every building that reaches for something, in every revolution that failed and every love that didn't last, and every morning you woke up and thought the day might be different. That shimmer, that specific, unreasonable shimmer, that's not delusion, that's data. And he leaves the formula, 3 syllables, the whole philosophy. The thing that survived Ludwigshafen and Munich and Heidelberg and the Nazis and the Atlantic Ocean and Harvard and Leipzig and the party and the wall and Tübingen, and 92 years of history doing its absolute level best to prove him wrong. He leaves you standing here in whatever room you're in, with whatever life you've half built and half abandoned, with whatever version of the future you've been too embarrassed to admit you still believe in. And he says that belief is not your weakness. It's the most accurate thing about you. You were born in a room that was too small for what you were going to want. Everyone is. The wanting starts early and the world starts explaining, patiently at first and then less patiently, that the gap between what is and what you feel should be is a problem with you, a calibration error, a symptom of insufficient realism, insufficient maturity, insufficient willingness to accept that this, here, what exists, is the working definition of enough. Ernst Bloch spent 92 years telling you that that is a lie. Not a comforting lie, not the kind of lie that gets told to protect you. It's the kind of lie that gets told to manage you, to keep you calibrated to a reality that was built by people with an interest in you not imagining alternatives. The wall is the lie in the concrete form. The forced retirement is the lie with a pension attached. The suppression of the journal is the lie with an official letterhead. Every system Bloch ever encountered tried to tell him that the future was settled, finished, already decided, and his job was to describe it accurately and stop making noise. Bloch made noise until he died. Here's what you take from this. Not hope as a feeling, because feelings are weather and weather changes. Not optimism, which is hope with the difficulty edited out. Hope made palatable for people who want the orientation without the cost. What you take is the structure. The philosophical architecture that says incompleteness is not your failure, that the gap between what is and what should be is not a bug in your psychology. It is the most honest thing about you. It is the part of you that is reading reality correctly, that knows the present tense is not the verdict, only the current evidence, and that evidence is always, always incomplete. The not yet is not a promise. Bloch never promised. He argued there was a difference. Promises are about outcomes. Arguments are about direction. He's not telling you it will work out. He's telling you that the direction matters, that moving toward the thing you can feel but not yet see is not delusion. It is the only rational response to being a conscious creature in an unfinished universe. You are an unfinished creature in an unfinished universe, and that used to feel like a problem. Maybe it's a description. Bloch sat in the reading room at Harvard, stateless, broke, invisible, writing 1,400 pages about human longing for an audience that didn't exist yet. The audience arrived, it always does, not on schedule, not in the form you expected, not with an apology for being late, but it arrives. The future is already here, restless, knocking around, making itself felt when the rest of your brain has the good sense to be quiet. The knock is not a symptom. Listen to it. Not yet. If something in this episode is sitting with you, if the gap between what your life is and what you can feel it should be is a little harder to ignore than it was an hour ago, then good. That is exactly where Bloch would want you. Restless, awake, kicking about the house with a feeling you don't have a name for yet. If you want to keep on this journey with me, you know where to find us. We're on TikTok, Instagram and X with the handle @TheObservingEye, which is where the short form lives when I eventually getting around to making some. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you could watch on YouTube. You can subscribe at youtube.com/@TheObservingEye, and you'll never miss an episode. You can leave a comment, you can tell me what part landed, and you can tell me what philosopher you want me to drag into the light next. I do my best to read everything. And if you want the full experience, no interruptions and no adverts, then the place you're looking for is theobservingeye.com. This is the home of the podcast. Every episode in full as audio and written word and completely ad-free. And it will always be ad-free because you all know by now what I feel about selling out to our corporate overlords. You can also email me at david@theobservingeye.com if you want to wax philosophical, or if you want to recommend philosophers and thinkers for me to cover in future episodes, or if you just want to tell me to fuck off. I'm right here listening and, eagerly awaiting your messages. But maybe don't tell me to fuck off. If this episode landed somewhere real for you, the best thing you can do is share it. Send it. This is that horrible marketing shit. You know I'm doing it. Send it to the person in your life who's carrying a future they haven't told anyone about. Leave a review if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, because it does help people to find the show. And I'd like to do this instead of my day job, so please subscribe. I don't mind. I enjoy my day job. This is a fun little side quest. I enjoy it. Don't worry. You don't have to subscribe. I'm not pressuring anybody. It's just bullshit words I have to say. Thank you for listening. There we go. I appreciate all of you, and you know I do, spending your finite time and your attention here, and I hope that you got something mildly useful to take away from all of this. So yeah, deeply appreciate it. And all you people who have emailed me and left comments and stuff, thank you very much for engaging and dropping me a message. It's really lovely to hear from all of you. You know who you are, you beautiful people. Take care, everybody. Much love, and I'll catch you soon.